I keep thinking about when we are comparing this to a game, right? And I think about most of the games that I play, you usually have set resources that you get to utilize, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's Monopoly, you have your money.
Right.
You know, people who might be a little OCD might, you know, or maybe most people do this, they put their money in order, right?
Right,
and you can see exactly how much you have and how much you don't have and what is available to you when you go around the board and you find a property and do I have enough to get this or not? Right. Or any other games, you might have like a certain amount of resources that you have to be able to purchase or do things within that game. Mm-hmm. And so you keep your inventory, right? You have that in front of you so you know what moves you can make next, what's available to you and what's not. Right. And I think that's what the budget really does for people is finding what resources they have available to them. And so then you can be able to see much more clearly what choices are available to you and what's not. Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, I could digress into the fact that credit cards kind of make that really hard for people to be like, oh, well, I have this over here. And so I actually have more ability to get things than maybe what. And that's kind of the problems that we get into. But essentially, like if you are not paying attention to what you actually have coming in and what's going out, then you're playing a game where you have no clue what you can actually do and what you can't do.
Yeah, and having a budget allows you to look at tomorrow and not have to worry about today. What I mean by that is look 2 or 3 turns ahead in this game. Mm-hmm. If you didn't have a budget, you're really playing for today. And getting through this turn. When you play strategy games, you better be thinking 2, 3, 4 turns ahead if you want to be successful at winning that game.
Long-term, big picture.
It is
always. And who wants to lose?
No, seriously. When you really start thinking about it, No, when you really start thinking about it like a game, you really start thinking, well, who wants to lose? Who wants to lose a game? You know, nobody wants to lose a game. So you really start thinking about, well, how can, like for my wife and I, it was, when you talk about roles, you know, in a game, you have roles like you have your tank who takes all the damage while your DPS people are off fighting on the sides or whatever, and then your healers in the back trying to make sure everybody's good, you know. And so you talk about these roles, and I know they're different for different games and things like that, but you know, every couple, I mean, I don't know if it's every couple, but it seems like most couples that I know, there's a saver and there's a spender. And so those are the roles that you have, like in our relationship and my wife and I's relationship. I'm the spender, she's the saver. And it's, you know, when we talk about that, and obviously, you know, Stephanie Armando, we talk about, you know, he's the spender, she's the saver. And so in every relationship, it seems like everybody has those roles. And I think the biggest catalyst for me understanding that I needed to change my role from being a spender to helping my wife be a saver was the whole idea of gamifying and realizing that, oh, okay, so we have a goal, we have an outcome. My behavior has an impact on the outcome. And so I need to think about what do I need to do differently to help my team reach the goal. You know, and that makes a huge difference when you're thinking about what can I do differently. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and you and Christy, I assume that at the top of that book where you had answer those 3 questions, I assume that a lot of that stuff that you're doing during the day is probably similar to what she's going to be doing, whether it's travel or whatever. So you really should be driving toward a goal together, right? So when you're spending money, you're making it difficult for her to reach her goal, right? Now, we'll get into her side because there are faults in saving too. We'll get into that. But if you are one of those that, hey, I'm going to save everything so I can reach my goal fast, well, there are some problems with that, and we'll get into that. But as you put it, you're the spender. Well, when you spend on whatever, it does have an effect. on the game. It either gets you closer or it gets you further away from reaching that goal or the winning the game of 5.
Yeah, and you think, oftentimes I think, I just $5 here, $5 there. That all adds up.
Absolutely.
And you may have lots of lots of money in the bank, but then you're looking at your credit cards and going, "Oh, we've been spending a little bit here." So we felt really liquid. We felt like we were doing really well. Well, now we have, if we have mounting credit card debt, well, now we need to figure out how to balance that. And what are we going to do on the other end to bring that back to where we need to be in the game process?
Yeah.
And so I think but if you don't have a budget and you're not aware, you don't even think about those things.
Right.
Right.
Now so you've created your income statement, right? We'll get into a balance sheet also. That's a little bit later in the game because the game is divided into two parts. There's the first part of the game is what we call that race to freedom or race to zero, where you are completely out of debt. Do you still have bills? Absolutely. You're always going to have bills. If you're going to eat, you're going to have bills, right? Yeah. But what you don't want is paying interest on any of those bills. Right. Now, granted, we can get into a philosophical argument about your mortgage or maybe some student loans. But for the most part, we're talking about credit cards. That if you're paying interest on credit cards, well, you haven't finished phase 1 of this game yet.
Right.
We'll get into phase 2 and the income statement. That's where the balance sheet. Balance sheet we'll talk about later. But the income statement is vital to winning phase 1 of this game, which is getting to financial freedom, getting to zero debt where you're not paying any interest. So the income statement is huge, but then that's just part of it. There's a part of that the expense side, right? You got your income side at the top. You've got below that, you've got your expenses. There's one part that is key to reaching financial independence, and that is, of course, that interest-bearing expenses, the credit card debt. This is where you have to take that budget to another level. This is where you're going to break down the interest and pay that off. You're going to, or break down the debt and pay that off. Now, there are 2 ways. Dave Ramsey is known for the Snowball method, right? Where you take your wins early, hopefully, and get that psychological boost. And then there's what's called the Avalanche. And there's variations of the 2. But the Avalanche is where, if you want to put it to left brain, right brain thinkers, the Avalanche method is the left brain thinkers that are take emotions completely out of it. This is a numbers-driven exercise. And numbers tell me I want to pay off high interest before low interest.
And that's essentially the difference between the 2 is the Snowball is I'm going to choose the smallest bill and pay that smallest bill off. And so the excitement there, the return there is like, I paid the bill off, and that's the excitement and the energy comes from that. And you're like, I can do this. So then you go to your next smallest bill and you pay that off. And then you go to your next, and then every bit of money, like, you were paying, say, $50 for a particular card. Well, then once that card is paid off, you still have that $50 that you used to be paying for that card. So now you put it into the next bill, whatever the next smallest bill is. So now you're not only paying whatever your regular payment is for that next bill, you're also paying the $50 that you were paying for the other thing. And that just continues to build until you're paying off all of your debt and you're debt free. Is that a good description of that in terms of the Snowball?
Yes. Yeah. You are snowballing it, whether you're going to call that snowball a snowball or an avalanche. It's still taking paid off debt, the money that you were paying off, using to pay off debt, and moving that over when it's no longer allocated to that credit card because it's paid off. Now you allocate it to another. You're not going off and using that to buy a couch, a new car, or anything.
You just don't look at that. You just don't look at that as a surplus.
No.
Right.
You look at that as it's already committed and it just needs to roll over into the next bill. Now, then what's the difference between the Snowball and the Avalanche?
Yeah. So the Avalanche is, like I said, that is the take emotions out of it, and you are paying off the highest debt first, and you're basically snowballing or pouring that money from one credit card, the highest to the next highest to the next highest, until it's all paid off.
But you're looking at the highest interest rate, right?
Highest interest
at that
rate.
point. Not necessarily the highest bill.
Correct.
But the highest interest rate.
Yeah, I'm sorry
for that. That's why I just want to make sure we clarified that.
Yeah, you're right.
That highest interest rate, because you're in your mind, you're thinking that's costing me more in the long run, and so I want to pay that off so that high interest rate is not then affecting my bottom line as much as a lower interest rate bill might be.
Yeah, if I say, I may have said the highest bill. It's not the highest bill, the highest interest. So it's efficiency of money.
Cool.
Ultimately, that will also create an efficiency in time, because you are going to end up paying those off sooner by doing it that way. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean the emotion-driven way of paying off your bills, meaning the snowball, is bad.
Right.
This is a game. If you are playing a strategic game and you're not having fun, you're going to stop playing that game.
Right.
Trust me. I played games that I just didn't have fun. I didn't want to play those games anymore. Right. This is the same thing. You have to enjoy playing this game. And if those little wins of paying off that card, even though it wasn't the highest interest credit card that you just paid off, but it was a card that was paid off, and it makes you feel good. And if that keeps you playing that game until you can reach the end of phase one of this game, then keep playing that. Keep playing it that way, for sure.
So it almost really depends on knowing how you're wired. I mean, because if it's going to take those little wins to make you feel like you're making positive ground on the whole process of paying off debt, if you know you need that little bit of dopamine high every time you pay off that bill and you're like, yay, it's done, then you should go with the snowball. But if you feel like you want to have the satisfaction of those higher interest rates being knocked out earlier, then you want to go with the Avalanche. So definitely the Avalanche is for those of us who are, and I'm not saying those of us including me, but those of us who are all about delayed gratification, which I'm much better than I used to be. But delayed gratification, definitely you want to do the Avalanche a little bit more, because it's going to seem a little harder in the beginning, but you're going to be making really more progress initially, aren't you?
Yes.
As opposed to the snowball.
Yeah, you're taking a little bit. Say again?
No, I was saying it would be good to explain that a little bit. Why that's.
Yeah. So it will take you a little bit more time to experience that win. Sometimes it'll take you more time, because if that highest interest credit card also has a higher balance to it, you only have so much money at the bottom of the income statement to avalanche into that credit card, right? So it may take some time. But man, once that starts paying off, because remember, your high interest or your high balance cards, let's assume the high interest was also a high balance card, meaning it's going to take some time. Well, your minimum payment is also going to be larger on those, right? Because it's a higher balance. Well, when you pay those off and you move that higher interest to the next card, you're moving a pretty good chunk over to that next card. Whereas if you did a smaller card, your minimum payment is going to be pretty small. So when you pay that one off, you are moving money over, but it's a smaller amount, and it could take longer to knock out those cards. But man, it takes you longer to knock out that first one doing the Avalanche, but after that it really starts, avalanching into all your other ones. It does go
So it really
fast.
speeds up pretty quickly.
At the end, it really speeds up. Where the snowball gives you the wins initially, but it does, and it speeds up a little bit because you're adding more money each time you pay off a card. But ultimately, it does take longer playing that game. Again, it's how you look at things. I'm a guy that looks at big picture every time. Jenn wants to make sure we're having fun and doing things to enjoy life as well. There has to be that happy medium. Fortunately, she allows me to handle the finance side of it. So we are paying, we always have paid off our high interest. When we were playing the game, that first phase of the game, it was always going to be the highest interest first.
Well, you see the value in that too. So, I mean, there's a point where it's, yes, you need to have fun, but it's also within what's going to make the most sense to free up more of our income over time. Because the whole reason why we do the higher interest rates first, paying those off, is because you are over time paying less money into those companies, those credit cards, and that frees up more money for you in the long term than doing it the Snowball way. I think that's where people don't maybe fully understand is how interest works on their credit cards and how much money they will end up paying over time because of those high interest rates.
Right.
And I think that's where it's, if you're able to look at like the facts or the data and how that plays out, if you're able to see how much money you will save in the long run by not paying it to the credit card company or whatever those places are,
right.
I think a lot of people would be willing to make those decisions maybe after like paying off a smaller one here or there, but then switching it. I mean, there's no set way that you have to do it. But for me, that was the important thing, is seeing that bigger picture. And I think that's part of it too, is sometimes people don't understand how much of that bigger picture is really there.
Yeah. And I think, again, we obviously our first conversation was a lot of exposition in terms of how this all got set up and how we all got started and everything. But I think we can kind of agree that across the board, in general, people don't get enough financial education in terms of all of these things. And we get left just trying to figure it all out ourselves. And you don't know what you know until you know it. And so many people are in the dark about all of these different strategies and all of these different things that you can do, which is amazing considering how much information is out there about financial stuff. But again, as we talked in our first conversation, I've never encountered someone who talks about finances the way that you do, Steve, and in a way that I can understand what you're talking about and it makes sense. And I can't even imagine how many other people are kind of in the same boat where they've never encountered someone who can translate financial information into a language they understand.
Yeah, and it's not just that. We're going to take it another step. Make it easy to understand. That's imperative. I mean, people don't play a game that they don't understand playing.
Right.
So we are going to make this game easy to understand. But there's another step too. We're going to provide you the tools. We want you to succeed, right? We told you we've got an income statement that we could use, your budget that you can use, an Excel spreadsheet that really kind of goes into that. But when it comes to paying off your debt, we also have Excel calculators or amortization tables that will be used to help you pay off those those credit card debts, right? And the tool is detailed enough where if you want to add an extra payment to one, or you want to snowball into this one, or avalanche into that one, you'll see how much faster it's going to be paid off. But here's the key. We also track interest. Right. We want to know how much interest are we paying if we were to do Snowball? How much interest would we be paying if we were to do Avalanche? Or if we weren't going to play the game at all and just pay your minimums, how much? You can track all of that with these tools, and that's so important. So if you are a big picture thinker, you're going to see how much interest you save by doing an avalanche over a snowball. And that's enough to convince a lot of people, even some that are driven by emotions, even some of them, that's enough to change them and say, no, I think we want to do the avalanche.
Right. I think because you get a visual for it. Because once you can see the actual numbers, because otherwise it's like, okay, you're just telling me numbers. Like I need something that I can actually see that's more tangible. To be able to see what it's actually going on.
And we talked about that, like as we've talked about, addressing this particular issue with people, trying to talk to them about what they need to retire. When you really start talking about those dollars that account needs to look like at that point, we've talked multiple times about people's eyes just glassing over, and like they look at that number that you shared with them and they go, that's impossible. It could never happen. So why even bother? But the reality is, when you really look at all of those things, it is possible. And because people approach that big number of what they need for retirement, and they look at that and they go, that is insurmountable. They can't see any of the small steps between where you are and that reality that would get you there, because there are enough small steps that would get you to the point where you are able to retire comfortably and have at least lean fi to get you where you need to be. But it's just that not knowing those steps, not seeing that, not listening to someone who can explain things so clearly, they're missing out on really understanding how effective they could really be at their own financial game.
I think it was Albert Einstein that once said, those who understand compound interest take advantage of it. Those who don't are taken advantage of it. Mm-hmm. And those who are given credit cards, and trust me, I mean, those companies that issue credit cards, they know what they're doing. They know who to give it to. They know who's not going to pay off those cards, and they're going to make more money off of that interest. That's how they stay in business, right? Mm-hmm. Well, our thing is to make sure that we understand interest on both sides.